Peppa Pig. George disappeared. George always loved playing in the yard. Every day he ran around the garden with his favorite dinosaur, imagining new adventures. Everything was as usual. Peppa was drawing in her room, Mummy Pig was making lunch, and Daddy Pig was reading the newspaper. Through the window, George could be seen running near the big tree. His joyful laughter echoed through the yard. But suddenly, everything fell silent. In the sudden quiet, Peppa looked up. At first, nothing seemed unusual, but then she realized George was no longer in sight. The backyard door was slightly open. On the grass lay his toy dinosaur, abandoned in an unnatural position, as if George had simply dropped it. Peppa stepped outside, but the garden was empty. No movement, no sounds, only a gentle breeze. Mummy Pig called for George, but there was no response. Daddy Pig joined the search. They checked behind the bushes, walked around the house, and inspected the fence. But there was no sign of where George could have gone. Half an hour passed. Peppa picked up the dinosaur and noticed strange marks on its plastic back. Narrow, elongated prints that definitely didn't belong to George. The unease grew. They searched the entire yard, the neighboring areas, but it was all in vain. Then Peppa heard a faint sound, a quiet giggle, barely noticeable, coming from behind the bushes. She froze, then slowly walked in that direction. Behind the bushes, no one was there, but the grass was pressed down, as if someone had just been sitting there. The sun slowly dipped below the horizon. The house sank into an eerie silence. The door remained open. On the table, the dinosaur lay still, now cold and forgotten. When darkness fell, Peppa heard the giggle again, this time right by the door. Peppa Pig, the twin brother. One evening, Peppa Pig's family was expecting a guest. Daddy Pig's twin brother, Gilbert, was coming to visit for the first time in many years. Daddy Pig often talked about how inseparable they were as children, but Gilbert had moved far away, and they had barely seen each other since. That evening, the doorbell rang. Standing on the doorstep was Gilbert. He looked exactly like Daddy Pig, but something about him was off. His smile was too forced, and his eyes seemed empty. During dinner, he barely spoke, silently observing everyone. His movements were unnatural, as if he was learning how to use utensils for the first time. George hid behind his chair the whole time, and Peppa felt uneasy, though she couldn't explain why. That night, Peppa woke up to a strange creaking sound. In the hallway, in front of the mirror, stood Gilbert. He wasn't just looking at his reflection. His reflection was moving with a slight delay, as if struggling to mimic his movements. At one point, he suddenly turned towards Peppa. In the morning, Mummy Pig seemed worried. Daddy Pig was gone. Gilbert was still in the house, acting as if he had always been there. His voice was muffled at first, but as the hours passed, it started to sound more and more like Daddy Pig's. Throughout the day, he imitated Daddy Pig's habits. He sat with a newspaper, tried to joke, but his laughter was hollow. As evening fell, a muffled voice was heard outside. It sounded like Daddy Pig. He was calling for help. Peppa rushed to the door, but Gilbert was already there. He looked at her and slowly smiled. At that moment it became clear. Daddy Pig wasn't coming back. Gilbert had already taken his place. Peppa Pig. The parents have changed. One evening, Peppa's family gathered for dinner. Everything seemed normal. Daddy Pig told funny stories, and Mummy Pig served their favorite meals. But something felt off. Peppa noticed her parents were unusually quiet as they ate, their gazes strangely empty. "Mummy, are you okay?" Peppa asked. "Of course, dear," Mummy Pig replied, but her voice was soft and lifeless. Daddy Pig smiled, but his smile was too wide, almost like it was painted on. That night, Peppa woke up to a strange sound. Footsteps echoed down the hallway, as if someone was pacing back and forth. She woke George, and together they crept out of their room. Downstairs, in the dark living room, they saw their parents standing motionless. Mummy and Daddy Pig stared at a single point, as though they were waiting for something. "Mummy! Daddy!" Peppa called, but they didn't respond. Suddenly, Daddy Pig turned his head, his eyes completely black. "Go back to bed," he said, his voice echoing and hollow. The children ran back to their room, trembling with fear. The next day, their parents acted even stranger. Mummy Pig didn't cook breakfast. She just sat at the table, drumming her fingers slowly. Daddy Pig stared out the window, ignoring the children's attempts to talk to him. "What's wrong with you?" Peppa finally yelled. Daddy Pig turned to her slowly, his smile stretching wider, revealing sharp, pointed teeth. "We're fine, Peppa. Are you?" That evening, the children once again heard footsteps. Peeking out, they saw their parents descending into the basement, a place that was usually locked. The basement door was slightly ajar, and a strange, low hum came from within. "We have to see what they're doing," Peppa whispered. The children carefully followed them down the stairs. Inside, they found Mummy and Daddy Pig standing in front of a large black mirror. Their reflections moved independently, as though alive. "Soon they'll be part of the house, too," Mummy Pig said, her voice sounding unnatural. Daddy Pig turned toward the children, his face twisted into a horrifying grin. "Join us," he said, stepping forward. Peppa and George ran back upstairs, but the hallways stretched endlessly. The walls seemed to shift and close in on them, as though the house itself was alive. "You can't escape," Daddy Pig's voice echoed throughout the house. The vanished house. One morning, Peppa and her family woke up in their usual home. Daddy Pig was warming up breakfast, Mummy Pig was making tea, and George was playing with his toys. Everything was calm, but when Peppa decided to step outside, she noticed something strange. Outside the window, there was no familiar green yard, and the sky looked dull and gray. Peppa went to the door and opened it. There was no sound, no people, just darkness. The yard was gone, and the house itself seemed to be surrounded by a dark, endless space. The walls of the house began to slowly disappear, as if dissolving into the air. Peppa tried to return inside, but the door slammed shut, and everything inside turned dark. She screamed and ran back to her parents, but they were sitting as if nothing had happened. Daddy Pig was still reading the newspaper, and Mummy Pig was still making tea. Peppa tried to tell them what had happened outside, but they didn't hear her. Then Peppa noticed that everyone in the house seemed strange. Daddy Pig no longer laughed, and Mummy Pig wasn't smiling. In search of answers, Peppa decided to step outside again. This time, when she stepped out, she found herself in an empty world. Everything around her was gray, with no trees or familiar buildings. Peppa turned around and saw the house she had lived in disappearing, turning into mist. In panic, she rushed back into the house, but now everything inside was as empty and gloomy as it was outside. Mummy and Daddy Pig were sitting in dark corners, their faces strange and lifeless. Then Peppa realized that her house was gone, and perhaps she was too. There were no traces of her family, nothing familiar. Everything had disappeared.